My fiancé is having an affair with my best friend, and my family helped them hide it. I played dumb until the wedding day, which is when I humiliated them all. After finding the secret group chat, which they all used to hide the affair, I scrolled to the top to see when it was formed, which happened to be 18 months ago. My mom did shame them at first, in fairness to her, but just a few days later she asked my fiancé Alex if he truly loved my best friend Peach. He said he was absolutely sure, but that he also loved me too. That's when my half-sister Maria and half-brother Richard offered that Alex try to convince me to be in an open relationship. By the way, at this point, he and I were already engaged. Alex mentioned to them all that he thinks our relationship seemed too far deep to try to bring it up. Well, my mom Angie literally offered to cover for Alex and Peach until he felt ready to bring up an open relationship to me. As I was reading, all I could think was how in the actual F could my family betray me like that? I honestly wanted to vomit. However, I was just taking screenshot after screenshot. The more I read down, I found out that Peach took my spot on our previous family trip. I got a really bad stomach bug a while ago that caused me not to go. I can't even begin to imagine what they did on the trip. And the fact my mother was okay with all of this, I think is what hurts the most. The fact she's known for way over a whole year that my fiancé was cheating on me. A few days after finding out, I had a moment of weakness and ended up sending the screenshots to Alex's parents and explained the whole deal to them. They called rather quickly. They asked me if Elle had any hard proof of them cheating besides the group chat and claims about the provocative pictures. They asked for more screenshots and I just basically sent them a good chunk of them. His mother made me feel so awful for sending them. She was sobbing and apologizing for her son. She soon became inconsolable. His father took the phone and asked if there was anything his son could do to make it up to me. I was offended that he asked that. I asked him if I could be frank and told him that unless his son could shrivel up and disappear, then there wasn't anything really he could say. His father said that he understood. I asked him if they could keep this to themselves until I brought it up to Alex. They said they could, and we ended the call. For a while, I thought vomiting from stress was rare, but it finally happened. Alex heard me vomiting and tried to rub my back. I held my hand up and cleaned myself up. He had concern in his voice and was asking if I was okay. For once, I actually saw nothing but red, yet I kept the composure. Later that day, I started getting ready for the rehearsal dinner. Alex told me he had to get some things done before heading to the restaurant. I told him that was fine and that I'd see him later. Before he left, he said he loved me, and this was one of the days he was excited for. I said me too, trying not to have much rage behind it. Once he left, I gathered all the screenshots. For some people that don't. No, you can schedule text messages to be sent out at a certain time. I decided to do this to send all the screenshots of everything to everyone. Peach's family, our friend groups, his family as well as mine. I sent it to go out at 1:25 p.m. This would be the halfway point of the dinner and people would be dropping off gifts early for us. I gathered the black hole of stress forming in me and headed to the restaurant when it was time. My mother and her husband were already there. My mother hugged me and all I could do was stand there. To feel her hands on me almost felt like she was personally violating my spirit. I did a quick tap hug so she wouldn't get suspicious, and we headed inside. Guests started flowing in and everyone was surprisingly on time. Once everyone was gathered, Alex went on this whole spiel of how he was happy everyone could come and that he was excited for his family for the next dinner. He mentioned how I was the love of his life and how he was so happy our families would mingle and we could be one. I wanted to ask him how dare he say that, but nothing but fake smiles and nods from me. Peach was basically looking like a clueless dog and smiling right along and clapping for us. To see this happen in real life is truly mind-boggling. The lengths people will go to have their cake and eat it too. I could barely eat as the stress was getting to me so badly. At the time, I set for the messages. People's phones started buzzing and Alex's and Peach's phones were blowing up. I would like to admit that for once, a genuine smile crept on my face. It was like watching an entire kingdom crumble and fall. The horrified faces of Peach and Alex when they looked at me was golden. It's the one highlight I will hold on to from this emotional day. My aunt went ballistic. She started calling my mom a cruel, heartless beach over and over. My mother hurriedly checked her phone and saw I sent near the screenshots. She started screaming and becoming irate, saying I was really trying to ruin her life again. My grandparents' reaction hurt the most because they started screaming at my mother. My grandmother was trying, with a few of our other guests, to hold my aunt back as she started screaming every explicative she could. My grandfather was screaming at my mother that he didn't raise her. At this point, everyone is screaming and crying hysterics. My other bridesmaids were cursing Peach out and calling her names. I hate to admit it, but I took joy in that. My grandfather went on to scream at Alex. I just started laughing and sobbing. I had so much emotions that I genuinely think my body didn't know what to do, so it did everything. The tears just kept coming. My cousin escorted me outside as fast as she could with Alex chasing us down. He kept screaming my name and begging to talk. I ignored him and my cousin was pushing him away from her car so she could get in and drive off. She took me to my aunt's house and told me to stay there and not answer the door for anyone. I ignored him and my cousin was pushing him away from her car so she could get in and drive off. She took me to my aunt's house and told me to stay there and not answer the door for anyone. I kind of felt like a kid being left at home alone. I didn't, and just sat on the floor. That's when I just started bawling. All the emotions. Elf kept pent up throughout just finally came up. After about another hour, my aunt and cousin came back home. They hugged me for like a good 5 minutes. When we finally broke off, I noticed my aunt had a few scratches on her. I'm assuming they couldn't hold my aunt back from my mom for much longer. My aunt caught me up on everything. Apparently after my cousin drove off with me, Alex came back in and started screaming at Peach for ruining everything. They got into a screaming match and some of our friends were trying to split them apart. My grandparents, aunt, and Tony, my mom's husband, were drilling into my mother for answers. Tony was the most livid. Apparently, during the family trip I couldn't go to, my mom told Tony that I had offered my ticket to Peach so she could enjoy a nice break for herself. Tony at this point is screaming and reading some of her messages out loud. She was begging him to stop and that she could explain. My aunt started adding on that she better start explaining because all she sees is a worthless mother and vile person. Apparently, this set my mother off and she started screaming about how she hated me, about how I ruined her life and made it difficult, how she felt like she could never be happy because I was always a constant reminder of her biggest mistake ever, and she regretted not terminating me when she had the chance. That set my aunt off and she basically pounced on her. For context, my aunt is infertile. In her words, I was the daughter she never got to have. So in her mind, she went full mama bear mode on my birth giver. That's what I'm calling my mom now. To make a long list short, Tony is divorcing my mom. He's had suspicions for a few months she's cheating again, and these suspicions of his turned out to be true. Peach exposed Alex's text to her that he was sleeping with her because he always thought she was prettier, and he didn't know how to bring it up to me. Peach's father spammed her with calls and will be cutting her off financially. Apparently this is my fault, and I'm an evil witch for ruining her according to her texts. My mother has been on a tirade with our family exclaiming, I'm an evil person for destroying her world again. Half-siblings felt it wasn't their place to say anything to me, and that I should have expected Alex to look elsewhere because men aren't monogamous and people love who they love. I've been getting texting calls from everyone. My aunt offered for me to stay with her until I get out of this jumbled mess. I accepted it seeing as I have no intention of going back to that apartment. I've already emailed my landlord and will be handling it all next week. My boss emailed me back and said I was allowed to use some PTO for as long as I need. I will definitely take it seeing as I'm highly considering moving somewhere quiet and peaceful. I thought things were pretty much settled by this point, but I was very much incorrect as things have escalated heavily. The day after I just described, I woke up and took a long hot shower and turned my phone on. I couldn't even unlock it or clear notification before I got a call from one of my bridesmaids. I answered and she immediately started screaming at me about how I could ignore Peach and Alex in their time of need. At first I was confused seeing as I don't give a damn about them anymore. I asked her to not yell at me, but she continued anyway. She screamed that Peach hurt herself. I really wanted to scoff on the phone because at this point I know she was doing it to rally people on her side since I won't respond to her text. Yet she also told me Alex tried to take his life too. His friends found him at my apartment all groggy. They took him to the hospital where he was cleared since they didn't have to pump. They are keeping him on watch for the next 72 hours. After this, my friend group has been split very heavily since I didn't respond to either of them before they did this. I still have no intention of talking to either of them. I don't really care what they do for attention, just as long as they leave me the hell alone. I also found out some other crazy things. I already mentioned that my egg donor wasn't faithful, but I didn't know just how deep this all ran. She told her husband that my half-siblings aren't his, and a lot of other very hurtful things. He had to call the police on her to escort her off his property because she started assaulting him. Tony followed up with me this morning. Yes, he is divorcing her. His lawyers are drafting up his papers within the next week or so, and told me that she confessed that I was the product of a long-term affair she was having while my father was still alive. That left me extremely stumped and shocked, but at least I'm able to tackle solace in the fact that my egg donor's life is falling apart. You see, after finding out Tony is getting papers, she has tried to backpedal. She has been calling my aunt begging for her to convince Tony not to do this, or else she will be homeless. She has been trying to call Tony and his family, but they all have been ignoring her. Yet, this wasn't enough for my egg donor. She knows my aunt's work schedule and tried to come over to assault me. My cousin was with me still, so she couldn't get in, but hearing her scream at me, some of my very low insecurities hurt, and I started to have a panic attack. She tried to actually break the door down, but was unable and left. Later that day, I got a call from my half-sister. She tried apologizing on behalf of our egg donor, and then had the nerve to ask if I could watch my nieces while her and her husband go on a trip. I love my nieces and nephews, but I told her that she could go F herself. If she wanted me to watch her nieces, then she would have to ask through my aunt. Speaking of my aunt, her and my cousin are currently packing up Alex's things and dropping them off at a buddy of his. His name is Kyle, and he's been helping me through all of this as well. He dropped off my favorite fruit this morning to my aunt. He also assured me that I can talk to him anytime. I asked him if he would be in further communication with Alex, and he said no. He's just holding on to his things until his parents can pick them up. I really appreciate him.
My husband remarried my sister when he found out she got the inheritance, and I didn't. But actually, I lied to him about it. How much did you get from the inheritance, huh? That's what my husband Simon asked me the night of my father's funeral. I heard your father left $3 million, so I'll ask again, how much did you get? I felt uneasy right away. I was still grieving, and Simon's question made me anxious, so I lied. I got nothing. There's no inheritance for me. It looks like only my sister and mother got something, I added. Simon smiled broadly at that. I knew it. Your parents thought you were incompetent and didn't care about you at all. I'm glad I was right. What I want is a divorce. I can't handle being with someone who's poor now. I've already chosen who I'm going to marry next, so I want you to leave my life. With those words, Simon made me sign the divorce papers. He and his family laughed at me, thinking I was miserable, but they couldn't have been more wrong. No one will ever understand how relieved I felt when Simon betrayed me. My name is Jane. I come from a family of 4, including my younger sister, Kim. Kim and I never got along well, not since we were kids. My mom always took Kim's side and defended her every chance she got. It made me feel really lonely, but I eventually got used to it. My dad, Dan, who was the only one who supported me and could help, was always busy with work and rarely home. Growing up, despite being at home a lot, I felt deeply lonely. Even as an adult, life at home never changed. I couldn't go to college because we couldn't afford it, but once I started working, I found out Kim was going to a private college. Kim is so bright, it would be a waste not to send her, they said. Jane, you're not as sharp or smart as Kim. It would be a waste for you to go to college. Since you're an adult with a job now, you should contribute to the household, and you should also pay for Kim's tuition. You're her older sister, it's only natural for you to work and support her, my mom said, acting like this was perfectly normal. I had always endured unfair treatment, but this time, it made me furious, and tears started streaming down my face. Seeing me cry, Kim looked at me disdainfully and said, "It's your own fault for being incompetent, isn't it? You're less attractive than me, and you get worse grades. You should at least try harder. If you can't even manage that, then you're truly worthless." I couldn't stand the toxic atmosphere anymore, so I moved out of my parents' house when I started working. Having to do chores every day was tough, but living alone wasn't hard at all. In fact, it felt great to be independent. At first, my dad sent me a bit of money to help out, but after about 6 months, it stopped. Instead, I got a letter from my mom. "Dad's been sending you money without permission. You don't deserve it since you never paid for your sister's school or sent us any money. I'll send you an invoice for what you owe us soon. You need to pay back every cent. Stop stealing." My mom, still hating me, sent an invoice for exactly what my dad had sent, calling it repayment. I was too uncomfortable to argue, so I paid up and moved to a new place in secret. A few years later, I married Simon, a coworker, and cut ties with my parents for good. So, I went back to my parents' house to tell them about my marriage. When I returned, I was shocked to see my father. He had always worked hard, but now he looked much older. His back was bent, and he seemed to struggle just to stand. "Oh, so you're back," I asked my mother about my father. "What's wrong with him?" She sneered at me. "Your father injured his back last year and can't work anymore. He's always at home now, getting in my way. He's so lazy, he can barely move. He's as useless as you, Jane." Simon was taken aback by my mother's words, but his eyes brightened when he saw my sister Kim. "Wow, you're Jane's sister? You're really beautiful. It's hard to believe you two are related." Since starting college, Kim had become even more self-centered. She dressed in expensive clothes and dyed her hair in flashy colors that were quite embarrassing. Despite being an adult, she still acted like a student, which reflected her attitude toward studying. "This guy's your husband, Jane? He's pretty cool and handsome. He doesn't seem like your type at all, Jane. Honestly, I feel sorry for you, Simon," my sister said sweetly to Simon, touching him in a way that was hard to miss. It hurt to see that, but what hurt more was seeing Simon so happy and excited about her attention. "Anyway, I don't plan on staying here long. I'm going to marry Simon, and I'm cutting ties with all of you." "Well, if you're going to cut me off, can you at least wait until I'm done taking care of your father?" my mom said wryly between bites of her snacks. "I need to take care of him, but I really don't want to. Kim shouldn't have to go through this either. It's her college life, and it'd be a shame to make her waste time on such a trivial, annoying matter, right? So, Jane, it's your responsibility to take care of your father. You're both incompetent, so you'll get along just fine." My mom's words infuriated me, but I couldn't ignore my father's needs. From then on, I had to visit my parents' house often to look after him. Once I started helping out, I noticed neither my mom nor Kim had jobs. Kim didn't work part-time, and mom stayed home since dad got sick. Yet, they ate out and shopped a lot. I was shocked when I found out they'd taken dad's bank book without permission and spent his savings like it was normal. Dad knew but didn't say anything. "Dad, they'll keep doing this if we don't stop them. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Even if I told you, Jane, they wouldn't think they did anything wrong or apologize. I didn't want to burden you any further. You've been through enough." My dad always worked hard for our family and loved me dearly. I wanted to help him however I could. Just as I was thinking of how to help, I got a call from the hospital where dad was taken after collapsing. I rushed to my parents' house before heading to the hospital. Mom and Kim were casually watching TV, unconcerned. The hospital called about dad collapsing. "Why are you both just sitting here?" "It's an exaggeration to say he collapsed. He fell in the hallway and hit his head. The ambulance took him to the hospital, so it's up to you now. We need to go to the hospital. I'm worried about dad." "Shut up. If he doesn't make it, the insurance will cover it. Why are you getting so emotional?" My mother dismissed me and turned back to the TV. Disgusted, I left them both and hurried to the hospital. At the hospital, my father lay in bed connected to tubes, barely conscious. As he drifted in and out of awareness, he managed to speak softly. "I'm sorry for this sudden turn. I feel like I'm being punished. I failed as a father because I couldn't protect you from our family," Dad said in a weak voice. Those were his last words before he closed his eyes. "Dad, none of that matters. I love you. Please get better," I pleaded, holding his hand tightly, but he didn't respond. A week later, a lawyer called me about my father's will. He'd informed me that it included details about his inheritance. According to the will, I was to inherit $3 million. I couldn't believe it. Apparently, my father had another bank book hidden away, separate from the one my mother had taken, with $3 million in it. He left a note saying he wouldn't tell anyone else about it, his way of looking out for me even after he was gone. His kindness touched me deeply once more. My husband remarried my sister when he found out she got the inheritance, and I didn't. But actually, I lied to him about it. I had to return to my parents' house to retrieve the hidden bank book. My mother and sister were waiting at the door, acting like they owned the place. "What are you doing here now? Trying to scavenge things because Dan died? How despicable. Everything in this house belongs to me and my mother. The house, the car, everything. Don't come here acting like a thief." I knew I couldn't discuss my inheritance with people who wouldn't listen to me anyway. "Wait a minute, I'm Dad's will," I said, realizing I was just here to collect father's keepsakes. "Shouldn't I inherit something as well?" My mother then produced a document and showed it to me. It was another will stating that my mother and sister would inherit everything from my father's estate. The handwriting looked suspiciously like my sister's, not my father's unique style. I couldn't read the will very well since Kim's handwriting isn't very clear. "Are you suggesting this is Dad's will?" I asked. "It doesn't matter what you think. This is the will. I've already informed all our relatives and neighbors about it. You can't dispute it now. Refusing to let me inside, knowing I recognized the will as a forgery, my mother blocked me from entering the house. Defeated, I returned home that day where Simon was waiting for me. Were you at your parents' house? If you had told me, I would have come with you. I wanted to meet Kim. Why are you so interested, Simon? This doesn't concern you. I went there to receive my inheritance from Dad, but they kicked me out. Wow. How much did everyone inherit from your father? I'm not sure of the total, but he owned the house, land, and everything, so it's quite substantial. I see. How much do you get, Jane? I stopped myself. I couldn't tell him the truth. My gut feeling said there was no inheritance for me. It was all going to my mother and sister. Hearing this, Simon grabbed divorce papers from his room and handed them to me. I knew it. I knew you wouldn't get anything. You're really tied to that family. With a perfect sister like that, I guess it's no surprise, right? But to inherit nothing? How much do they despise you? I want a divorce now, because there's no benefit for me if we stay together. Honestly, I've been in contact with your sister Kim a lot lately, and you're just in my way. Simon had already signed his part of the divorce papers, so naturally, I signed them too. I fought hard to hide my smile as I watched Simon happily carry the divorce papers to the city office. It felt like the last time I'd see him smile like that, and that goes for my mother and sister too. It was the moment when karma caught up with those who had tormented my father and me all those years. Later that day, I met with the lawyer who handled my father's will and asked him to accompany me to my parents' house. There, when I showed my mother and sister the real will, their usual calm expressions turned pale as they read it over and over again. That's a lie. I have a will here that clearly states only Kim and I are supposed to inherit. Then let's settle this with a handwriting analysis. If it's proven the fake will was intentionally made, you could face charges of fraud. Are you okay with that? The lawyer's challenge left my mother speechless. I've also heard from Dan about many things he said, even as his health declined. You neglected him, sold his belongings without permission, and did as you pleased. Kim, you were involved in risky behavior with men and gambling, paying off debts with his personal bank book without permission. Due to this misconduct, both of you have been disinherited. If you interfere with Jane's inheritance rights, we'll pursue legal action against you as well. As the lawyer finished, both my mother and sister sat there in disbelief. I decided to retrieve my father's hidden bank book and leave their house for good. Finally, I was completely free from my family. After that, Simon, unaware of the truth, apparently confessed to my sister and started dating her. My mother and sister kept the inheritance issues hidden and quickly married him to support their lifestyle and use him like an ATM. Simon, oblivious to their schemes, bought several luxury cars and quit his job, relying on what he thought was their inheritance. Eventually, Simon began to suspect something was wrong when he realized there was no inheritance. He urgently contacted me. Jane, I was mistaken. You're all I have. I want to start over. Well, I don't need you. Besides, you have Kim now. Take care of your wife properly, okay? I said calmly and hung up. In fact, just minutes before Simon called, I received a call from Kim as well. You've destroyed my life. Simon quit his job and went on a spending spree as soon as we got married. I can't believe I married a man who only cares about money. He's ruined our family name. What are you going to do about it? I responded calmly to my sister, who was shouting hysterically. Kim, you're just as money-minded as him. You two are a perfect match, really. And I heard you and Simon got along very well while he and I were married. You should be happy your love worked out. I'll file for compensation for the affair later, though. From now on, let's communicate through our lawyers. I never want to hear from you again. But I'm your sister. You're not treating me like family. Don't make me laugh. You were the one who didn't treat me like family. With those words, I ended the call with my sister, blocked her number, and never heard from her again. I finally felt free. With my father's inheritance, I built a house and moved in. I found a new job as an office clerk and now enjoy a busy, but satisfying life on my own. Sometimes I feel lonely, but I have my memories of my father to comfort me. I'm heading out now, Dad, I said, feeling my father's gentle smile watching over me as I looked at his picture hanging on the wall of my home.